My husband had an affair with his assistant and his family thinks I should just suck it up for the kids' sake. I'm done being the one who sacrifices everything. My name's Rachel, 36F, and I thought I'd married the man of my dreams. James, 39M, was everything I could have hoped for, successful, charming, and at least I thought, faithful. We'd been together for over a decade, with 2 kids who adored him. But everything came crashing down when I found out he'd been screwing his 24-year-old assistant behind my back. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. This had been going on for months. I discovered it by accident, stumbling across a series of explicit texts on his phone. My stomach churned as I read his sickening words, my hands trembling with betrayal and rage. I confronted him that same night, unable to keep the fury bottled up inside. "How could you do this to us?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. James had the audacity to look ashamed, his face pale as he stammered through pathetic excuses. "It was a mistake, Rachel," he pleaded, reaching for my hand. "She meant nothing to me." I yanked my hand away, disgusted by his touch. "A mistake?" I spat back. "A mistake that lasted for months?" He had no real defense, just pathetic apologies and pleas for forgiveness. But the damage was done, and I knew I'd never look at him the same way again. I spent the next few days avoiding him, trying to wrap my head around the mess he'd made of our lives. But that wasn't the worst of it. His family got involved, showing up at our door unannounced, crowding into my living room like they owned the place. His mother, Margaret, 65F, was the first to speak. "Rachel, dear, you have to understand," she began, her tone condescending. "Men make mistakes. James is just going through a phase." I stared at her, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "A phase?" I replied coldly. "He cheated on me for months, and you're calling it a phase?" Margaret didn't back down. "You have a family to think about," she continued, as if I hadn't already thought about that 1,000 times. "Divorce is hard on children. You don't want to throw everything away over one mistake." I glanced at James, who was standing by the doorway, silent and pathetic, like a scolded child. I couldn't believe he'd told his family, let alone allowed them to come here and try to guilt me into staying. His sister Emily, 34F, chimed in next. "Rachel, we know this is hard, but James loves you. He just made a poor choice. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive him?" I felt trapped, suffocated by their judgmental eyes. Their words felt like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. I looked around the room, feeling like a cornered animal surrounded by people who had no idea what I was going through. "He didn't just cheat on me," I snapped, my voice rising. "He betrayed me, lied to me, humiliated me. And you want me to just brush it off?" Margaret sighed, shaking her head like I was some petulant child throwing a tantrum. "Rachel, nobody's perfect. Marriages go through rough patches. You have to be strong for the family." I laughed bitterly, unable to believe the absurdity of it all. How could they expect me to stay after everything James had done? I wanted to throw them all out, to scream at them to leave, but I held back, clenching my fists until my nails dug into my palms. James finally spoke, his voice weak and pleading. "Rachel, please, I know I messed up, but we can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes." I felt a surge of anger, turning on him with a glare. "Now you want to work through it? After you've destroyed everything?" He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. His pathetic plea only fueled my anger. He hadn't cared about losing me when he was sneaking around with his assistant. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I need all of you to leave," I said firmly, looking directly at his family. "This is between James and me. I don't need you trying to convince me to stay." Margaret looked offended, crossing her arms as she stared me down. "We're just trying to help, Rachel. You'll regret this decision if you act out of anger." I met her gaze unflinching. "The only thing I regret is trusting him." They exchanged glances, clearly not expecting me to stand my ground. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "Out, all of you. Now." I couldn't stand the sight of them any longer. They filed out reluctantly, casting judgmental looks over their shoulders as they left. When the door finally closed, I was alone with James. The silence was thick, suffocating. He took a hesitant step toward me, his face a mask of regret. "Rachel, please, just give me a chance to make things right." I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. "You think you can just apologize and everything will go back to the way it was?" He swallowed hard, his eyes filled with desperation. "I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. Whatever you want, I'll do it." But his promises felt empty, hollow words from a man I no longer recognized. I couldn't look at him without feeling a wave of nausea. "You disgust me, James. You lied to me, made a fool out of me, and now you want me to just forgive you." He reached out, but I stepped back, keeping a safe distance between us. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice trembling. "But I love you, Rachel. I love our family." I shook my head, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. "You don't get to use that excuse. You didn't think about our family when you were with her." He hung his head, defeated, and I could see the realization dawning on him that he'd shattered everything beyond repair. For the next few days, I went through the motions, numb to everything around me. I avoided his calls, his messages, and focused on my kids, trying to shield them from the chaos that had become our lives. But James's family wouldn't leave me alone. Margaret called constantly, leaving voicemails about forgiveness and working through our differences. Emily even showed up at my work, cornering me during my lunch break. "Rachel, I know you're hurt, but you have to think about the kids," she said, her tone patronizing. "They need their father." I clenched my fists, barely able to contain my rage. They had no right to dictate what was best for my children. I told her to leave, barely able to keep my composure. "You don't get to make decisions for my family," I snapped, my voice shaking. "You weren't there, you didn't see the messages, you don't know what he did." Emily's face softened, but I could see the judgment in her eyes. "People make mistakes, Rachel. Don't throw away your marriage over something you can work through." I felt like I was drowning, suffocated by their expectations, their demands. I wanted to scream, to make them understand the pain I was in, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. They were too invested in protecting James to care about the damage he'd done to me. That night, James tried to talk to me again, his voice soft and pleading. "Rachel, I'm begging you, please don't give up on us." I turned to him, feeling a surge of anger. "You gave up on us the moment you decided to cheat. Don't put this on me." He looked down, defeated, and I could see the tears welling up in his eyes. "I'll do anything, Rachel. Just tell me what I need to do." I felt a flicker of satisfaction at his desperation, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. "I don't want anything from you, James. I just want you to leave me alone." The next morning, I woke up to find an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a letter from James, pouring out his heart, begging for my forgiveness. He wrote about his regrets, his shame, his promises to change. But as I read his words, all I could feel was anger. He was trying to manipulate me, to make me feel guilty for even considering leaving him. I crumpled the letter, throwing it into the trash. I wasn't going to be swayed by his empty promises, his pathetic pleas. He'd made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. I was done letting him control my emotions, my life. I decided to reach out to a lawyer, determined to take control of my future. I wasn't going to let James or his family guilt me into staying in a marriage that was built on lies. But the moment he found out, he showed up at my office, desperate and unhinged. "Rachel, please don't do this," he pleaded, his eyes filled with panic. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling, talk to a therapist. Just don't throw everything away." I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of calm. "You threw it away, James. You destroyed our marriage, not me." He looked crushed, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. As I walked him to the door, he turned to me, his expression one of desperation. "I'll tell everyone it was my fault. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I shook my head, unmoved by his pleas. "There's nothing you can do to make this right, James. You made your choice." He left, and I felt a wave of relief, a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. But his family wasn't done with me yet. Margaret showed up that evening, banging on my door, demanding to talk. I opened it, barely able to contain my frustration. "What do you want?" I asked coldly, already tired of her meddling. Margaret didn't waste any time, launching into a lecture about family values and forgiveness. She went on and on about how James was a good man who had made a mistake, and how I was being selfish for wanting to leave him. I stared at her, barely able to believe the audacity. Selfish, I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. Do you have any idea what he's put me through? The lies, the betrayal. And you think I'm the one being selfish? She huffed, crossing her arms. Rachel, marriage is about forgiveness. You need to think about the children and the life you've built together. I could hardly believe the hypocrisy. I took a step back, trying to hold my composure. I'm done listening to you, I said, my voice shaking. You have no idea what it's like to be betrayed like this. I don't owe James anything, least of all my forgiveness. Margaret's face twisted in anger. You're being unreasonable, Rachel. Families stay together. You can't just throw him away over one mistake. I felt a surge of anger, a fire burning inside me. He threw me away the moment he decided to cheat. Don't come into my home and tell me how I should feel. She glared at me, but I stood my ground, refusing to let her intimidate me. She eventually left, muttering about how I was making a terrible mistake. But I didn't care. I was done letting his family guilt me into staying in a marriage that was built on lies. I knew they would never see things from my perspective. They were too invested in protecting James, too blind to see the damage he had caused. That night, I made a decision. I was going to file for divorce, and I wasn't going to let anyone stop me. I needed to take control of my life, to break free from the toxic influence of James and his family. I was ready to start over, to build a future on my own terms. The next day, I met with my lawyer, feeling a sense of relief as I explained the situation. She listened carefully, nodding as she took notes. You're doing the right thing, Rachel, she said, her voice reassuring. It's time to put yourself first. I felt a surge of gratitude, thankful for her support. I was tired of being told what to do, tired of being pressured into forgiving a man who had shown me nothing but disrespect. As I left her office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was taking control of my life, making decisions for myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone stand in my way. But James didn't take the news well. He showed up at our house that evening, furious and desperate. You're really going to throw everything away? He demanded, his voice shaking with anger. You're going to destroy our family over one mistake. I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of calm. You destroyed our family the moment you decided to cheat, James. This is on you. He looked at me, his face filled with disbelief. I love you, Rachel. I'm willing to do anything to make this right. I shook my head, unmoved by his words. You should have thought about that before you betrayed me. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The days that followed were filled with tension. James' family continued to hound me, leaving voicemails, sending messages, and even showing up at my work. They tried every tactic they could think of, from guilt to manipulation. But I refused to let them sway me. I was done being controlled, done letting them dictate my life. I was determined to go through with the divorce, no matter what they said. I knew I deserved better than this, that I deserved a life free from lies and betrayal. I wasn't going to let James or his family pull me back into their toxic web. I was stronger than they realized. One evening, I received a call from James's sister, Emily. Her tone was softer this time, almost apologetic. Rachel, I know things have been hard, but I just want to say I understand your decision. I was taken aback, unsure if this was another manipulation tactic. Do you? I replied cautiously. She sighed, and I could hear the regret in her voice. James has always been selfish. I just didn't realize how much until now. I'm sorry for everything we've put you through. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief, like maybe someone in his family finally understood. But I knew it didn't change anything. The damage was done. Despite Emily's words, the rest of his family continued their relentless campaign. They tried to turn our mutual friends against me, spreading rumors and painting me as the villain. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, surrounded by people who wanted to control my life, to force me into a role I no longer wanted to play. But I held my ground, refusing to let their lies and manipulation affect me. I knew the truth, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel guilty for choosing myself. I was done being their pawn, done letting them dictate my life. I was ready to break free, to start over on my own terms. As the weeks passed, I started to feel a sense of peace. I was moving forward, rebuilding my life one step at a time. I focused on my kids, on creating a stable and loving home for them. I refused to let James's mistakes define our future. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was strong enough to face them. I was finally free from the lies, the betrayal, and the toxic influence of James and his family. I had taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone pull me back into the past. I was ready to build a future filled with hope and possibility. But just when I thought I was free, James showed up at my door again, looking desperate and defeated. "Rachel, please just hear me out," he begged, his voice trembling. "I've been to therapy. I'm trying to change. I need you." I looked at him, feeling nothing but emptiness. "You needed me when you were with her too. Funny how you didn't think of me then." He looked crushed, his shoulders slumping as he realized I wasn't going to give him another chance. "Please, Rachel, I can't do this without you." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of closure. "You already did this without me, James. Now you can live with it." I closed the door, feeling a sense of finality. I knew he was struggling to accept the consequences of his actions, but that was his burden to bear, not mine. I wasn't going to let him drag me back into his web of lies and deceit. I had moved on, had built a new life for myself and my children, and I wasn't going to let him ruin it. I was free from his control, free from his family's judgment, and I was determined to stay that way. I had found a sense of peace, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I was finally living my life on my own terms. The next time Margaret showed up at my door, I was ready for her. She launched into her usual lecture, but I stopped her mid-sentence. "Margaret, I don't want to hear it. Your son made his choice, and now he has to live with it. I'm done with all of you." She looked stunned, clearly not expecting me to stand up to her. "Rachel, you can't mean that. We're family." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of freedom. "No, Margaret, we're not. Not anymore. You lost that privilege when you tried to manipulate me into staying." She left, defeated, and I knew I had finally severed the last tie that bound me to them. After that, I felt a new sense of clarity. I focused on my kids, on building a life that was filled with love and stability. We spent more time together, making new memories, finding joy in the little things. I refused to let James or his family haunt me, refused to let their toxic influence seep back into my life. I was free, free to create a future that was mine alone. I knew I had a long road ahead, but I was ready to face it. I was stronger than I had ever been, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I had reclaimed my life and I wasn't looking back. Months passed, and I began to feel a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I started dating again, cautiously opening myself up to new possibilities. I met people who valued me, who respected me, and I realized just how much I had been missing. I didn't need James, didn't need his family's approval. I had found happiness on my own, had built a life that was filled with hope and possibility. I was no longer defined by his betrayal, no longer haunted by the mistakes of the past. I was free to live my life on my own terms, to create a future that was mine and mine alone. I was finally whole. Then one day, I ran into Emily at a coffee shop. She looked surprised to see me, but there was something different in her eyes, something that looked like respect. "Rachel, I just want you to know, I think you did the right thing," she said softly. "James has been struggling, but he's finally facing the consequences of his actions." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure. I didn't need their approval, didn't need their validation. I had found my own path, had built a life that was filled with love and strength. I was free from their control, free to live my life on my own terms, and I was finally at peace. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me. I had survived the betrayal, the manipulation, and the relentless pressure from James's family. I had come out the other side stronger, more resilient. I realized that I didn't need anyone's approval or forgiveness to live my life. I had created a future that was mine, one that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. I had learned to trust myself, to stand on my own 2 feet. My children were happy, thriving, and I knew I was giving them a life filled with love and stability. I had found peace, and I wasn't going to let anything take that away from me. One evening, as I sat with my kids on the couch, watching a movie, I realized just how far we had come. We were no longer living under the shadow of James's betrayal. We had built something beautiful, something strong, and I was proud of the life I had created for us. My children were happy, laughing and carefree, and I knew I had made the right choice. I had chosen to protect our family from the toxic influence that had once threatened to tear us apart. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I also knew that we were ready. We were a family, and we were stronger than ever. Then, out of the blue, I received a letter from James. He apologized yet again, but this time he sounded different. He acknowledged the pain he had caused, the damage he had done. He wrote about how he had lost everything that mattered to him, and how he was struggling to rebuild his life. I read his words, feeling a strange mix of pity and indifference. I had moved on, had built a life that wasn't tied to his mistakes. I didn't need his apologies, his guilt. I was free from the chains that had once bound me, and I wasn't going to let him pull me back into the past. I tossed the letter in the trash, letting go of any lingering feelings I might have had. I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't hurt. I was simply done. I had found peace, had built a future that was filled with hope and possibility. I knew that James would always be a part of my past, but he didn't define my future. I had taken control of my life, had created something beautiful, something strong. My children were my world, and I was determined to give them the life they deserved. We had faced the darkness, had come through the storm, and now we were embracing the light. I was finally free, and I was ready to move forward. As the years went by, I watched my children grow, watched them become kind, resilient, and strong. I knew that they had been through so much, but I also knew that they had found a sense of stability, a sense of peace. I had given them a home filled with love, had shown them what it meant to stand up for yourself, to choose happiness. I was proud of the family we had become, proud of the life we had created. We had overcome the lies, the betrayal, and the toxic influence of James and his family. We were free and we were thriving. I knew that our future was bright, filled with endless possibilities. One day, as we sat around the dinner table, laughing and sharing stories, I realized just how much had changed. We had found happiness, had built a life that wasn't tainted by the mistakes of the past. My children were my world, and I was grateful for every moment we shared together. I had chosen to walk away from a toxic marriage, to create a future that was filled with love and hope. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I also knew that we were strong enough to face them. We were a family bound by love, by resilience, and I knew that we could handle anything that came our way. Looking back, I realized that leaving James had been the best decision I'd ever made. I had reclaimed my life, had found a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations. I had created a home filled with laughter, with love, with hope. My children were thriving, growing into kind and compassionate people, and I knew I had given them the stability they needed. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my own strength. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of the past. I was free to create a future that was mine, one that wasn't overshadowed by lies and betrayal. I had found peace, and I was finally whole. Then one day, I ran into Margaret at a grocery store. She looked older, more tired, and she approached me with a hesitant smile. "Rachel, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't understand before, but now I see. You did the right thing." I felt a sense of closure as I looked at her, knowing that I no longer needed her validation. "Thank you, Margaret," I replied, my tone calm and steady. I had moved on, had built a life that was filled with love and stability. I no longer needed their approval, their forgiveness. I was finally free to live my life on my own terms. As I walked away from Margaret, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had reclaimed my life, had built a future that was filled with hope and possibility. I no longer carried the weight of the past, no longer felt burdened by the mistakes of others. I had found my own path, had created a family that was strong, resilient, and filled with love. My children were my world, and I was grateful for every moment we shared together. We had faced the darkness, had come through the storm, and now we were embracing the light. I was finally free, and I was ready to move forward with confidence and hope. And so we continued on our journey, embracing each new day with open hearts and open minds. We were a family bound by love, by resilience, by the strength we had found within ourselves. I had chosen to walk away from a life that no longer served me, to create a future that was filled with hope and joy. My children were thriving, growing into compassionate and kind people, and I knew that our future was bright. We had faced the darkness, had overcome the lies, and we had emerged stronger, more united. I was free to create a life that was filled with endless possibilities. And for the first time, I was truly at peace.